Donald Trump had the president of Venezuela arrested, but let's talk about a bunch of other times that the US president has done a similar thing in Latin America. Take Panama in 1989. First, President George H.W. Bush said Panama's dictator Manuel Noriega wasn't the legitimate leader. Then, the US indicted him on drug trafficking charges. Finally, they sent in the military to capture Noriega and bring him to face justice in a US court. Which sounds a lot like Maduro's arrest, doesn't it? Almost a century before Panama, in 1898, President William McKinley declared war on Spain and fought their forces in Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, and the Philippines. The aim was to remove foreign influence and replace it with American might. Then, under McKinley's successor, Theodore Roosevelt, US troops hugely expanded their operations in the region. Those operations were all justified by something called the Monroe Doctrine. In November, Trump published his own version of it, except he calls it
the Monroe Doctrine.
It all began as a speech given by President James Monroe more than 200 years ago. As nations across Latin America were gaining independence, primarily from Spain, Monroe's speech made it clear to European powers that the Americas were off limits to any more colonization. Now, at the time, it was seen as promoting sovereignty, self-determination, and democracy. But the Monroe Doctrine also carried a clear warning that if anyone in the region threatened US interests, it was ready to defend itself.
It became quite clear that underneath that idealist veneer was a reality that the United States was going to act as an imperialist power.
Back then, the threat to American interests in the region was Spain. By removing Maduro as Venezuela's leader today, the Trump administration is targeting a different rival, China.
The most important economic partner for Latin America has become China. The United States can't overturn this by force of arms.
And there are other similarities between then and now. In 1904, Roosevelt's version of the Monroe Doctrine said neighbouring countries of the US should be stable, orderly and prosperous. In Trump's version, the White House demands reasonably stable and well-governed neighbours. Roosevelt argued that if a country in the Western Hemisphere descended into chaos or wrongdoing, the US would step in and show force. Which isn't a million miles away from arresting Nicolas Maduro, a man Donald Trump described as an illegitimate dictator. By the time we get to the Cold War, it's taken on this more political edge, including removing socialist and communist leaders seen as hostile to the US. Like in 1954, when President Eisenhower backed a coup that toppled the government in Guatemala, or in 1973, when President Nixon backed the removal of the socialist president in Chile and installed a brutal dictator friendly to the US. And then in the 1980s, you've got Ronald Reagan invading Grenada and George H.W. Bush sending troops to capture Manuel Noriega in Panama, which we saw earlier. So while the arrest of Nicolas Maduro might have seemed shocking, the US military intervening in South America is part of a playbook used by American presidents for over 200 years. So if you want to find out how Trump's strategy differs, watch the full Foresight episode right now.